Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the DRB meeting being held here in Miami Beach at City Hall on Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023, and Happy New Year to everyone. We have a quorum of the board. Only one member is absent at the present time, and I want to say that I am acting as board chair, even though the new board chair will be assigned probably in February or March. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Michael.
Thanks, Mr. Bodner, and Happy New Year to everybody. With that, I'll turn it over to Stephen Rothstein, who can let members of the public know how they may participate in today's proceedings.
Sure. And in the risk of being redundant, Happy New Year to all also. Today's meeting of the Design Review Board has been scheduled in a hybrid format with a quorum of the board physically present in the commission chambers at the Miami Beach City Hall, and applicants, staff, and members of the public appearing either in person or virtually via the Zoom platform. In order to participate in today's meeting, those wishing to participate via the Zoom platform webinar may dial 888-475-4499, which is a toll-free number, and enter the webinar ID, which is 822-7394-1924, or log into the Zoom app and enter the webinar ID, which again is 822-7394-1924. Any individual wishing to speak on an item must click the raise hand icon if they are using the Zoom app, or dial *9 if they are participating by phone. Before I swear in those that are testifying, I'd like to read the city's notice regarding lobbyist registration. If you are appearing on behalf of a business, a corporation, or another person, you need to register as a lobbyist with the city clerk's office. If you haven't registered yet, you should register before you speak to the board. You do not have to register as a lobbyist if you are speaking only on your behalf and not any other party, or if you are testifying as an expert witness, providing only scientific, technical, or otherwise specialized information or testimony in this public meeting, or if you are appearing as a representative of a neighborhood association without any compensation or reimbursement for your appearance to express support of or opposition to any item. Expert witnesses and representatives of neighborhood associations shall, prior to appearing, disclose in writing to the city clerk their name, address, and the principal on whose behalf they are communicating. If you are an architect, attorney, or employee representing an applicant or an objector, you must register as a lobbyist. These rules apply whether you are appearing in favor of or against an item, or encouraging or arguing against its passage, defeat, modification, or continuance. At this time, Mr. Chair, I'd like to swear in the members of the public that will be testifying. I believe there's only one here. So, sir, I just need you to please stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you'll be giving in this proceeding is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
With that, I just want to make, before we get on to the regular agenda, we have one correction to note in the after action. In terms of the staff members present, it should be Stephen Rothstein in place of Nick Kalergis for the December 6th meeting. Sorry about that error. So with that, can we take a motion to approve the after action for December 6th?
I move to approve the minutes.
Motion made by Mr. Sheldon, second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Agopian, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next, we have one request for continuance, which is DRB 22-0876. This is 333 East Riva Alto Drive. This is an application that was previously continued from another meeting. However, the applicant has requested that the application be continued again. They're still working on changes to the plans to address the concerns previously expressed by the board. Mickey, did you want to say something on behalf of that application?
Yeah, just good morning. Happy New Year, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mickey Morero, 200 South Biscayne Boulevard. Actually, this application was my partner, Michael Larkin, who is out of the country, and my colleague, Emily Balter, who is on maternity leave. We're both working on this. So I am sadly the third in line here to let you know that the design team is still working very hard. We're hoping to be before you today, but we think by February, they'll be more than ready, and we'd ask to continue to that day. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
I just want to make sure we don't have any public comment on the request for continuance. And just to keep it on the record, we have nobody online with their hand raised to speak on this item and nobody in the audience.
So I'm going to close the public portion and turn over the board for comment and a motion.
I'll make a motion for continuance.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Diffenderfer, seconded by Mr. Sheldon. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Motion passes. The item is continued to the February meeting.
Number 7.
Well, that will move on to the first application for action on the agenda, which is DRB 22-0867 for 4350 Nautilus Drive. This application is found on page 9 of the board packages. This is an application requesting design review approval for the construction of a new 2-story home with a partial understory, including one or more waivers, front and rear setback variances, and a variance for the minimum pervious open space requirements to replace an existing home. Now, you may remember this application came before you last on on November 1st of last year, and the board was generally very supportive of the overall design, but some concerns were expressed regarding the monumentality of the front elevation. The applicant and the architect have since revised the plans, which staff believes now fully complies with the direction that the board gave them at the November meeting to provide more of a horizontal emphasis. Staff continues to be supportive of the application and is recommending approval in accordance with the final order, the draft final order. And with that, I believe we have the architect online on Zoom. And if we can bring up the presentation, and Aaron, if you'd like to say anything before the architect speaks.
Good morning. Happy New Year. That's it. I mean, I think Miguel can do it.
Miguel, are you there?
Good morning. Happy New Year to all.
Miguel, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you now. Just a second.
Good morning, Miguel. Before you address the board, I need to swear you in.
Yes.
Okay. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be giving in this proceeding is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to set the clock at 10 minutes to address the board.
Thank you. I would like to go to the page number 12, so I can show you what we're working on. Okay. As you can see, is in the center is our facade. We made some changes to blend it better with the surrounding houses, and to not having a very strong view of our house. So we wanted to blend it with more horizontal lines, and we took apart our columns, very vertical that we have. And as you can see in number 18, if you can change it. 18, please. Thank you. This is a view from the street of the new facade. And with this idea of the horizontal and blended it better with the houses, and having a long like a garden piece of metal with plants above the garage, and I think it works nicer and softer. So we have this planter, and also on the terrace above the master bedroom, we have an idea of putting plants, so the house is softened, and it blends better with the houses around. You can see the two renders below, the small ones, and you can see the house on the left and on the right. There are a lot of trees, and so houses also, these gardens blend them together very nicely. So this is what we just wanted to show you. And if we can go to the exhibits and page number 4, please. So we can show you what we have and what we
Miguel, just a
are
second.
proposing.
I think just a second. Miguel, just a second. Just for our communications team, I'm not sure if those exhibits were uploaded, but they are on the Novus agenda under plans/comparison. If we can give us a second to bring up those sets of plans under plans/comparison.
Thank you. And page number 4. And page number 4. Okay. So on the left is the previous. Sorry. Okay. On the left is our previous proposal. On the right is the new one. And as you can see, we don't have these columns, vertical columns with these shades in front of them. So the house now has regular windows, horizontal lines, and we think it works a lot better. Thank you.
Miguel, did that complete your presentation?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone from the public wish to speak? Come forward or raise your hand at this time.
Mr. Chairman, there is nobody online with their hand raised.
Okay, so I'm closing the public portion and turning it over to the board for comment.
Well, I can start. I mean, I was really fond of this project the first time around, and I agree that the change, I think, makes it much more appealing from the street. I hope the architect and the client agree that it's a better project for this. I think it totally changed the look and the kind of the forcefulness that I think the board felt last time. So I'm supportive. Great job.
I mean, everything but the front before was so gorgeous in this project. So, you know, I'm not the architect, but it's a really nice change.
I think this is lovely as well. And the garage, it's going to be the same screening design throughout the rest of the facade. Nice. Good job.
We get one, we need 2 motions, one for the design and then one for the variances.
So very quickly, I support the variances for the reasons set forth in staff's analysis. Specifically, I concur that the irregular shape of the lot proposes a practical hardship, justifying all 5 of the variance requests, and numbers 1 and 2, the setback reductions are pretty de minimis, and so for that reason, I'm moving to approve all 5 variance requests, subject to staff's recommendation that the driveway entrance be reduced to 10 feet in width at the property line.
Could we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Agopian. All in favor of the variances?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 6-0. Now if I can get a motion on the design.
I move to approve the design.
Seconded by Ms. Keller Nelson. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Miguel.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along, we have two items left on the agenda, both for the same lot. It was originally the same lot. This is the next application, DRB 22-0891. This is 302 West Toledo Drive, the north side of the existing lot. This is an application requesting design review approval for the construction of a new two-story residence, including an understory and a height waiver. This application is a result of a lot split application to split the parcel at 320 West Toledo Drive into two individual buildable lots. Just to make a few corrections to the staff report here, the applicant is requesting a 2-foot height waiver to go from 24 feet to 26 feet for a flat roof. Regarding the proposed finished floor elevation, actually the finished floor elevation is proposed at 15.5 feet NGVD, which is 6.5 feet above base flood elevation. We had noted 15 feet in the staff report when it's actually, I'm sorry, we noted 14 feet for the finished floor, and it's actually 15.5 feet. This is important because the applicant is requesting the 2-foot height waiver, not to add additional height to the main house, but to provide a higher understory area. So that's what we're supportive of, that one waiver request. The home does include an understory. We're supportive of the application. There is only, as I mentioned, that one waiver request. With that, I'll turn over to the applicant for their presentation.
And Mickey, before you start, I just need to ask the board if there's been any ex-parte communications that should be disclosed at this time. And then Mickey, you have your architect online?
Yes.
I'll need
and also Mr. Harari needs to be sworn in as well.
Okay.
The owner.
Yes, gentlemen, if you could please stand up, raise your right hand. And Mr. Oring, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, do you solemnly, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you be giving in this cause is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. And Mickey, 10 minutes?
Yes, this should be okay. Good morning again, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Mickey Marrero from Brooke Haverdale, Fernandez and Larkin, 200 South Biscayne Boulevard. With me today in person is Phil Parari, the owner of the property, and my associate Gray Crow. Just real quickly, what we passed out, just so that, and Robert will get to in a second, is just a slight modification on some of the drawings, removing a concrete banding that shouldn't have been in those plans. Everything else is the same to what was submitted to you all. If we could get a presentation on the screen while I introduce. So again, Robert Mooring is online. He is with Domo Architecture, the project architect. He'll be doing most of the talking, but I want to introduce the project a little bit. This project was the subject of a lot split. That's one of the main reasons it's here before you. It was one lot, not a pre-42 home, but a home that was previously there. It was approved by the planning board in November to be 2 lots that are compatible in size and shape to the rest of the neighborhood. These 2 homes have been designed, and we're doing one at a time here, but just to set the stage, these 2 homes have been designed by Domo Architecture to have a similar vocabulary and to be compatible, but also be unique and distinct in their own way. In addition to having to be before you as a result of the lot split, we're also seeking a waiver, as Michael mentioned, of 2 feet on the height. And the reason for that is for obviously resiliency purposes. These homes were built with understories, and in order to make the understory more functional and usable, these 2 feet are necessary. What they've done to mitigate these 2 feet is place that height towards the center of the property, so it's almost not discernible from view. And also, again, it's a flat roof, not a slope roof. If it was a slope roof, it would actually be able to have higher height than we're requesting. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Robert, who obviously has a lot more to say than I do about the design of these homes. And we'll reserve time for rebuttal if there are any questions. I will mention also briefly, it's been the holiday season, so it's been a little tough, but Philippe and his team reached out to 12 to 15 different property owners through letters, through, posting in the door, and actually was able to speak to 3 or 4 of them. We heard nothing from a negative standpoint. Folks are supportive of the home, so we're happy about that. It's tough to get people here, as you all very well know, the day after New Year's holiday, but there's the general support for these properties. So with that, I'll turn it over to Robert to go through the design with you, and again, reserve time for rebuttal if necessary.
Good morning. Happy New Year, everybody. Next slide, please. As you mentioned, this is the result of a lot split. This is for the northern lot, lot 15, as shown on this survey. The lot size is equivalent to a standard lot in this district with 60-foot width. Next slide. This is aerial showing the location of the property in the two lots within it. Next slide. And the neighborhood is a mix of 1- and 2-story homes, both traditional and contemporary. The home directly to the south is a newer construction home as well. Both sloped and flat roofs in the neighborhood. Next slide, please. So let me walk you through the plans really quickly. This is the site plan showing you the siting of the house on the property. To the street is a 1-story guest house raised on pilotica, as this is an understory home. We sought to do 2 understory homes for resiliency in the city, and also so that it hides the car from the street, and you have increased garden area by creating an elevated garden at the entryway. The massing of the main home is shifted towards the rear of the property, or the rear half of the property, giving a nice facade to the streetscape, and then set back further than required at the waterfront. Next slide, please. As mentioned, this is an understory home. There's a two-car garage at the front with an enclosure and a building access vestibule in the center of the property. The rest of it remains open, understory, with parking in the front and a recreational area at the rear. Next slide, please. First floor, you arrive at an entry garden with a water feature. You cross over, small guest suite at the front in a separate structure, and then the main home to the rear, with first floor is the main living spaces and a guest suite. Opening onto a rear terrace with an elevated rear deck at the pool. The pool is elevated up to the level of the home. Next slide, please. And the second floor contains the family's bedrooms. And as a requirement for the single family regulations, we have 2 courtyards on either side flanking the central staircase, with glass windows looking into this garden space. It'll be a very lovely area when you go up and down in the home from the understory all the way to the second floor for the family. Next slide, please. And the roof, we are not requesting any rooftop activities. Next slide, please. Just to show you that we are compliant with zoning parameters. It's the first and second floor lot coverage. Next slide. And overlaid, we're compliant with the parameters. Next slide. As well as for unit size. This is the understory lobby. The garage does not count. We have up to 600 square feet. We have less than that. Next slide. First floor compliant, and next slide. Second floor compliant. Next slide, please. And open space with front and rear yards, we are also compliant within the parameters of the code. Next slide, please. This gives you an idea of the volumetrics of the home. As Mickey mentioned, we did pass out a handout. The difference between this slide and the handout is those side courtyards. We, at the request of the homeowner, we removed the banding beam that goes around the perimeter of the roof lines at those courtyards, so they're completely open to the side. The rest of it remains the same. The 1-story guest house to the street, the home set to the rear portion of the lot, and the pool terrace elevated to the home level, stepping down to the waterfront. Next slide, please. Give you an idea of the elevations. This is the north elevation. The home is going to be clad in a series of warm gray tones of stone, a Pietro gray stone, with several different textural finishes to give visual interest, offset against a polished cementitious finish to the roofline profiles on the soffits and the edges. The mullions will be proposed to be a bronze finish with clear impact glazing. We do have decorative screening elements for privacy on some of the facade windows to the street and to the water. Next slide, please. This is the south side. Again, you can see it's an understory home elevated with the lobby below and 2 levels above. Next slide. This is from the street. Guest house is in the front. We have a rented version coming up next to show you that explains it a little clearer. And screens on the second floor. Next slide. And from the waterfront. Next slide, please. This is the rendered 3D model, showing you the offset tones of the gray stone against the polished concrete finish, cementitious finish of the roof lines, and the elevated character of the house being an understory. Next slide, please. In this section, we are requesting the height waiver in order to create an understory, because without that height waiver, we would not be able to do it. We would not have the minimum height required for an understory home. So this shows you the understory level, and then the first habitable floor and the second floor above that. Next slide, please. Again, understory and the 2 levels of the home. Next slide. And our front and rear yard elevations and side elevations, next slide, are compliant with the parameters of the code. Next slide, please. So the height waiver diagrams, we're requesting 2 feet of additional height. The vast majority of that goes to the understory to give us an 8-foot ceiling height within the vestibule, 8'3" to the paving level of the driveway. Without the height waiver, we would have 6.5 feet in the vestibule and 6'9" underneath. Code requires 7'6" minimum in that space. So we wanted to open up and make it a little more bright and airy, less, a dark space underneath. Next slide, please. There's a rendering from the front. You can see the decorative screens across the guest house front with the stone cladding. We are proposing green wall elements as well as planters at both the first and second floor, which will cascade and soften the facades. Next slide. And from the rear, you can see the angular faceted geometry of the architecture. When you see the next home, is more of an organic one to create kind of visual difference between the two, but yet be harmonious in general intent. We have facade screens on the facade at the bathroom at the rear, but the rest of it remains very transparent and open. That concludes my presentation.
Mickey, do you have anything to add?
No, that would be it.
Thank you, Robert. Anyone from the public wish to speak, come forward now or raise your hand online.
Mr. Chairman, there is nobody with their hand raised online.
So I'll close the public portion and turn over to the board for comment.
I'll start. Well, I do definitely think removing the horizontal concrete bands is definitely a plus in the overall design. So I'm glad to see that. Overall, I think obviously, the Domo architect and design team, they do a great job. Their homes, are, I find, very successful and very well thought out, and there's a lot of attention to detail. We've seen some great examples on Pine Tree, where they have 2 homes, I think, next to each other, I believe, or maybe not. But I'm a little, it's a little tough for me because you basically are maxing out, as much as you can get on both of these lots. You took one big lot, made 2, and then both of them, and I know we're looking at each home individually, but just by the fact that we're reviewing them both today, I do look at them both, but they're both, maxing out the lot coverage, maxing out the unit size. Super appreciative to see that we're taking advantage of the understory code. I'm not sure, how we see so many other homes that don't request the additional 2 feet of height waiver. And this one, you're kind of stating that it's required in order to make it work. So I'm not sure that's entirely accurate. I love the different material articulations and everything like that, but I do get a little bit, I do feel like we're squeezing a lot of home on narrow lots. And it's especially kind of highlighted by the fact that because they're only 60-foot lots, you only have 6-foot setbacks are required on the sides, which you're complying with, of course, but it just makes for two very massive structures that are actually sort of articulated as three structures on each lot, if you look at your axis. So that's my initial thoughts. They just seem so large. I don't know about giving a couple more feet here.
And Jason, I just want to comment, maybe you can add to this. So this went to the planning board. The planning board reviews the unit sizes of the neighborhood and lot coverage. And so typically when we have a neighborhood which is average, which would be a unit size of about, 30%. And the planning board will recommend no more than a 45% unit size. In this instance, because the average unit size of the neighboring homes was already large, the planning board did not place a restriction further on the unit size or lot coverage.
Yeah, and just again, to add to what Michael said, what we do before we submit these applications, not to you all, but to planning board, we do an analysis internally in our office with the architects of what's most compatible for the resulting new homes. Staff also does it, and in this case, we both agreed that the neighborhood called for homes in this size, in this range. So they are compatible, and in fact, in addition to the calculus, Mr. Harari and his team did go out to all the surrounding neighborhoods, and there were no objections to the scale or design of these homes based on those discussions and that outreach.
I think you'd also argue too that probably having the homes divided versus, the massing divided into two versus having one larger massing on the site would be more in character of the neighborhood than a larger lot. I mean, we're looking at some homes now on very large lots where we're going to ask them to break up the house along the street to make it look like it's, more than one giant home, because we're seeing homes on these larger and larger lots. So the code does restrict, the opposite lot aggregation to more than 2 or 3 lots. We have a lot of properties that were aggregated before that code was in place, and now they're aggregating multiple, like 2 double lots. So you have 4 platted lots, and does create a very large home.
And I will just go back a little further in time. I don't know, about 6-7 years ago, the code used to allow you to ask for 70% unit size. And as applicants tend to do, if you allow something, you ask for it. So a lot of times I was coming with applications of homes in the 65-66% range, not quite 70, but that was very common. The city commission decided that those were too big and 50 was acceptable. So 50%, we do see a lot of homes that come in just under 50, but there's no longer an opportunity to get that 70% or in the 60 range. So these really are, compatible and within the limits of what's intended.
Michael, shouldn't we see both of these at the same time? I mean, if we have to, what's the point of reviewing this individually and then the next one?
Well, I think the context is important. So if the board wanted to table a discussion on this and start the presentation for the next application and provide comments, do you guys have a context elevation showing the homes side by side?
No, I don't believe we have. Robert, do you have that?
We don't.
We don't. They're 2 distinct presentations, but
right.
Is there something that you have available? Maybe you could send, I don't know.
No, or I think, it's up to the board. If the board wants to table this discussion and then see the next presentation, I think that's appropriate too.
Well, I'd like to respond to Jason's comments as well as Mickey's before we move on. I agree with Jason. I think that in terms of what the planning board said was okay, there's a reason why there's a planning board and then there's a design review board, and what might be allowed and what is possible to use then becomes translated through design choices to make it seem, better or worse. So I would say I looked at the information that was provided, and then I, went to Toledo Island and took a look at the properties. And I was actually surprised at how small the property seemed, considering how large in my head it seemed like these individual houses were. I thought I went expecting to see, one of these very, very large properties. And I was actually surprised that the planning board even allowed these to be split. So my point is that I agree with Jason, and then it seems like you're putting a lot of house on not the biggest lot, and the fact that you have these 2 homes that have very similar massing that seem oversized right next to each other is contributing even more to it seeming to be too much for what it is, although that's allowed. I think that this is more a design decision and a design concern, but that was my impression too, that this just seemed too massive. I also am confused as to why the same thing that Jason has about the understory, as to why other applicants don't need these waivers, but now you're saying that you do. I don't know if that's something that you could address.
We have had, so the good thing about this property in terms of the zoning is it's RS3. So the board can grant a waiver. The board has granted variances for RS4 lots when the height is restricted to 24 feet in order to get a decent ground level for the understory. So if this was zoned RS4, they'd be asking for a variance. This is not that case. The board can grant a waiver. Mickey, what is or Rob, what is the height, the clearance of the understory?
8'3".
Yes, I think it's not excessive. So it's like I say, the understory is a factor of, you know, the flood elevation and the height that the applicant is reasonable to have for the understory. And I think having a height of, you know, 8 to 9 feet is not unreasonable for the understory. And it's sort of the opposite of what the trend has been for the multifamily RM1, where we actually require a higher understory. So the problem with that is that the codes were developed in different times, and that RM1 portion was looked at, I think, more recently to require that higher understory, with the idea that when that was reviewed years ago by the Committee for Sea Level Rise and Resiliency, the idea was that was going to be, you know, looked at for all the different codes, and that committee was disbanded. We never got to that point. I do know that in terms of the new resiliency code, it does contemplate a higher height allowance for understory homes to avoid this sort of request for a waiver or variance.
And I would maybe just, you know, in response to that, Michael, I would say, so there's a code. So it's not a story, it's an understory, first of all, right? So I understand trying to make it more of a story by making it higher, and you know, but we do have a code minimum of 7'6". And so if you took, like, you know, it's 9 inches from here and then maybe 6 inches from the second floor, which has a 10'6" clear, third floor has 9. I mean, there are ways that overall that the massing could be, you know, could be mitigated a little bit to kind of maybe bridge this gap between 0 inches and 24 inches. I mean, it's not impossible.
I agree. I think especially since, I mean, all they really need is what they should be asking for maybe is a 1'6". That's going to bring them to 24 feet from the finished floor to the roof, which is consistent with, you know, other homes. Or if, like Jason suggested, if you want them to look at reducing, if they're going to propose to elevate the house to 15.5 foot NGVD, then take out, you know, 6 inches from each floor.
And Michael, I do want to pick up on your earlier point, though, that we can review the other project, table this one temporarily.
Yeah.
All the issues apply to that one, including height. And I'll have a bigger discussion.
Yeah, I think that's
Is that
perfectly
okay?
appropriate.
Mick?
Yeah, we're gonna show the other home. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's table this temporarily and
That's fine.
move on to the next item.
And I guess I just got to ask, has anyone had any ex-party communications on the second house?
I see none.
Before we bring that up, I'm just gonna read into the record the staff report for the next application, which is DRB 22-0891 for 302 West Toledo Drive, the south lot. This is an application requesting design review approval for the construction of a new 2-story residence, including an understory and height waiver to replace an existing residence. Again, the same sort of corrections I noted previously apply to this property. The applicant's requesting a 2-foot height waiver or a flat roof. The finished floor is located at elevation 15.5 feet, 5 feet NGVD, or 6.5 feet above base flood elevation. We are recommending approval. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mickey to do a presentation for this application.
So very similar introduction here. And again, for the record, Philip Harari is property owner. My associate Gray Crow is here, and Robert Mooring from Domo is on Zoom. I'm Mickey Marrero, 200 South Biscayne Boulevard, attorney for the applicant. Again, just for the record, this is a lot that was a result of a planning board application that was heard in November that approved the split of a larger lot into these 2 lots. The lots are compatible in size with the surrounding neighborhood. This home, like the other one, meets unit area, lot coverage requirements, setbacks. The only additional item that we're asking for, like in the last one, is the 2 additional feet of a height waiver to allow for a more functional understory, which, as discussed earlier, here is also 8 foot 3 inches. which is not a lot, but it allows a little bit more flexibility and usability of that area. And again, I turn it over to Robert to go through this project. I don't know, Robert, if you wanted, you can skip over some of the earlier slides because they're a bit repetitive from the prior application. So you can let us know where you want to start. If we could get the presentation on the screen.
Yeah, can you, next slide, please? Next slide, please. Next slide. Go next slide. Floor plan, please. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide, please. All right. This is the south lot. Again, it's an understory home. We have a vestibule access up to the home centrally located, and garage structures at the front. These are different from the north lot in that they are separated into two with a central access with a grand staircase going up on access to the center of the property, versus the other one was offset in the geometry. So we kind of played with the volumes, shifting them back and forth to create visual interest and differentiate between the two homes. Next slide, please. The first elevated floor, we have guest house structure in the front, again centered, versus the other one was offset. The architecture itself is more organic with curved lines. This fluid forms are more derived from inspiration from nautical, like a yacht design. And you can see that with the pool in the rear yard, which is centrally aligned again. But it's got this softer architecture to it. The main floor has the guest suite and primary living spaces of the home. Next slide. Second floor has the family's private living spaces. Again, we have extensive green roof and planters on the second floor to cascade over the side of the home and create the softness that we enjoy in our homes. Next slide. And the rooftop, again, no access, just the mechanical equipment centrally located. Next slide, please. We are compliant, as Mickey said, with lot coverage. Next slide. Next slide. As well as unit size. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide. And as well as open space. Next slide, please. Again, this is the handout shows the band beams on perimeter removed at the side courtyards, which are a requirement per the code. But you can see the more fluid organic nature of the architecture. The front guest house structure is connected to the rear with this green roof. It'll create a very beautiful space as you come up, centrally located with this oculus above you, large, generally open roof with landscape cascading over the sides. And at the rear of the home is set back and terraced with the pool elevated to the home and deep terraces and overhangs at the rear. Next slide, please. Give you an idea of elevations. This one has a more beachier, brighter color palette and exterior finishes with coral stone cladding, line painted stucco finishes, which will give you a nice depth and fluidity to the surfaces over time. Offset against metallic elements and bronze finish and clear impact glazing, as well as travertine stone to give you a little more of the natural finishes to it. Next slide, please. And from the south, next slide. And from the front, screening elements, wood cladding on the first and second floor. Next slide. And from the waterfront. Next slide, please. This is just a render to show you the side elevations. It's an understory, so it's predominantly open, other than the garage enclosures at the front, the building access in the center, and the pool basin at the rear. Next slide, please. And front and rear facades rendered in 3D. Next slide, please. Section, as mentioned, the reason we're requiring a waiver is that the base flood elevation for these properties is at 9 feet. So to do it without a height waiver, the first elevated floor will be at +14 with a 2-foot structure, because we do have water elements within that first floor plate. Would only give us a 12-foot ceiling NGBD for the understory, and the minimum height of the pavers is 5.25 per city code. So that would give us 6'9" of height clearance. So we need at least 18 inches to get what's required underneath. Next slide, please. And again, showing sections showing compliance with the understory and side yard elevations. Next slide. Front and rear compliant. Next slide, please. Next slide. And next slide. So from front, you can see this one has more of a fluid, organic feel to the architecture. Both the materials is lighter and brighter compared to the other one. The volumetrics are offset compared to the other home on the north. Gives them more movement and distinction between the two. This one, the guest enters central to the property, goes underneath the guest house and arrives within that garden courtyard, whereas the other one was offset, you entered from the side. Next slide, please. And from the rear, some more organic forms to the roof line, planters cascading to the front, down over the sides of the roofs, softening the facades, as well as the elevated rear pool terrace with steps going down to the waterfront at the rear. Screening elements over the bathroom. That concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Anything else, Mick? I ask if anyone from the public wishes to speak, come forward now or raise your hand.
And there is nobody online with their hand raised.
I'll close the public portion and turn over to their comments.
Well, I have to bring up Sarah's point, because if the last one looked like it was stuffed on the site, this one is even more dominating. And I think at least the first one had the guest house offset and an open space to the left with the stair and terrace. This one, the garage and guest house are centered basically, which then interferes with the one that you just did to the adjacent to it. So, and I think the flying beams, which you took off the side courtyards in the first house, reappear in the first courtyard, elevated courtyard, which I think will be a very annoying element to the first house. So in the end, I think it would have been very good to see them as a single design unit, both of these together, because I think they're looking at them very separately. You're not kind of masks some of the problems that are created when they would literally be adjacent to each other. So, I mean, I understand this is, I mean, in a way, this is just the consequence of what can be built. So, you know, our job is just to make it a little better. So I would suggest removing those flying beams of the so-called oculus in the second design. And if anything, maybe curving the bottom of the garage on the corners where, I mean, I think if you want to create this kind of prow of a ship and have this kind of Art Deco curvy corner situation, the one part where you see the house initially all of a sudden has a right angle corner at the bottom. So I would curve that and take the two beams off the second one.
And I think the beams are removed off the second home as well. There was another handout passed out.
No, I think Mickey, he's talking about that separate.
No,
That's the guest house in the front is connected to the main house with those.
yeah.
Understood.
So
I would appreciate the architect finding a way to reduce some of the height and propose something to us, to me, if you want me to
I had
get
this,
my approval.
I had the same concerns with the scale of these two together. And one thing I just have to say, I liked seeing evening renderings, but not as the only rendering, because I feel like the first one particularly has a very dark color palette. And when it's shown at night, it's kind of like, what are you hiding? Like I'm not, it just can't see what it really looks like during the day and in comparison to all the other pictures. So it looks like a dark color palette. And when it's at night, it probably doesn't look so obvious. But I think that if it were a day shot with light around it, it would feel like this big kind of dark, ominous thing. The second one, not so much, but that's all. That was my comment. I really want to see a daytime rendering of all these going forward.
well, twilight shots are always the most seductive. So that's why architects love them, but not not for a design board, it should be a very cold white axonometrics, I think.
I find it uncanny that everybody agrees completely. I feel like we've never been so universal in agreement on these points.
Well, I don't want to, I will temper this with saying like, look, I think the design, the complexity, the programming, I mean, there's some really beautiful elements here. I think some of the details are really quite elegant. And I love this idea, like one of them is sort of like this ship and one is a little bit different, but they still both kind of relate to each other. So I think that's kind of a really successful concept here. I just think it's just, for me, it's just a lot. Like you want to do a lot here. And I know the island, it is what it is. I know there's plenty of 60-foot wide lots on the other side of the island too. So I can see where like the density is going here, but like we're also setting, we typically, we're not big fans of height waivers anyway. So I mean, you've seen the history here. We grant some, we grant others, but we do ask that I think we like a lot of aspects of these homes, but we want to have a little bit of a give and take here from your side and our side. If you, I think for me, especially I'll speak for myself, if you want my approval on it. Sure. Yeah.
I also agree with Jason. I feel like both of the homes, the design is just screaming for an edit. There's so many elements. I want to have a clear vision and I'm not, but I agree. I like that there is a relationship between the two of them, but it's just a lot. And to Scott's point too, I think if there was a daytime view, we'd be able to see the elements. Maybe there would be some clarity that we're not getting here as much. Yeah, I also am concerned in general overall, what we've been seeing is with this understory concept. I like what Jason was saying, that an understory is not, it's an understory. And I feel like we've been seeing some projects where developers are coming in and taking the understory as a full story and taking it for granted. And that doesn't seem to be, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, sort of the intent of the code. What we end up having are these houses that are tall, that look even more massive than possibly we could have ended up with to begin with. Like, I do appreciate the fact that we don't have houses all over the city that are just on, stilts. Like, I like that there's some, thought and design to them. But it's almost like the pendulum has begun to swing the other way.
And ironically, on these projects, the architect is kind of just using it as the parking, which is actually a lot less. So it's even less for me to understand like why we need to have extra height down there when really you're using it for kind of what I think we kind of envision it is. It's like partly parking, and then there is a little bit of access, but even your paved area underneath does not, since your pool is elevated at the back, the paved area is just kind of like this part under the house that nobody's probably going to hang out in. I mean,
I was going to ask when is it appropriate for us to make a recommendation for the code? Because this is one of those situations where you have these opulent houses with basically what turns out to be a cellar underneath. And when you're 6'4", a 7'6" height feels horrible. So it's we need to either make it utilitarian or make it a feature and let it go to a reasonable height that works for these big structures. But we're again with code where it's pushing us to these uncomfortable situations every time where your guys are trying to do your job. I totally get that. So I'm not blaming you, but an understory short doesn't work with a house like this. It just doesn't. It's a wasted. It's just a weird thing.
To your point, to Jason's point, you're right. We've seen a lot of homes where the understory is designed to the greatest extent, usable spaces, furniture. It's actively thought out in terms of what someone will do in each space. And here, like Jason's noted, it's really just a large open area. There's nothing really designated for happening down there. So with that regard, if that's the case, and it's more just, functional for raising the house up, why can't you lower the house, the foot and a half, and avoid the waiver? Or I think you guys should be challenged to come back and design something, what's happening on the understory.
So if I know Robert's still on the line, I think he'd like to respond to some of those design comments. What I would say too is, remember, even though it is an understory and not a true story, it still is another slab that has electrical, that has plumbing components. So that is part of what aggregates to the additional height. I think in speaking to Philippe, there's probably some height that we can remove. But to your point, Scott, certainly I'm never going to have that problem of feet being 6'4", but somebody that comes to this house very well may. And that's why we want that additional, again, we're not making a story here. We're not trying to create a third story. It really is a true understory, but people still have to get out of their cars, move around. And we want that to be as comfortable of an experience as possible. But really with that, I wanted Robert to address some
Well,
of
I
your
was
else
to say, I've been in homes with these understories that are low, and they're low. I mean, it's an understory. It's not, I don't understand. You're asking for more height so you can do more down there. What else are you gonna, you've got 5,000 square feet. What else do you need to do in this area that's all shaded, that's under the house? I mean, it seems to me that the intent of the code is to raise the homes, to protect from flooding, which the Venetian Islands get a lot of flooding. I get it. But it's just for that, and then to make it look nice. I mean, that's the very basic. It seems that that's the intent, that it wasn't really meant to be used to make, I guess.
I think it was intended to have desirable understory spaces to use it. It's not supposed to be like a throwaway space.
Right.
And that's, part of what Mickey's saying too. We also don't want to see like the plumbing in those fixtures. So typically it does require, covering that so it's not seen. So it's a fine balance of what is the appropriate height, what's functional for the space.
And it's a lot of space, if it's the whole length or the depth of the property to put all this stuff.
And Robert, you've done some great understories in other projects, even larger buildings, larger lots in which water was cascading down to the lower level. There were functions down below, eating areas. This one is kind of vacant.
But I don't know. Maybe it's just my interpretation of the role of the understory. It doesn't seem to me. With all these other beautiful outdoor terraces, why would somebody choose to eat in the understory if you can sit and enjoy this beautiful view from all of these different vantage points throughout the house?
Yeah, there really is no relationship between the understory and what's happening above.
Well, I mean, Sarah, to some degree, I was just in Sanibel Island and on the Gulf, and there the understories are like 12 feet high because it's, right on the ocean. And I have to say, it's really a very usable space. So I actually think, it would be better if they're taller, but it would have to be consistent and something that's based on, a citywide code of what proportion, works properly.
And what were people sitting under there, or how are they?
Well, they use it for various, there they can have a gym, or they can have some kind of, it's like a shaded loggia, basically. So I think as a shaded area, or like the area under the Villa Savoie, it could be, apart from bedrooms, which should not be allowed, but something that could wash away, and they mostly did wash away there. But I think proportionally be better if it didn't feel like a dank basement, I think.
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder too, because to see this through, are we then, creating communities that are full of homes that are 3 and 4 stories now, as opposed to 2? And, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? But I think that this opens up larger questions by adding this understory, and then and what are we doing bigger picture, longer term? How does this impact the community as a whole?
It needs to be better addressed. That's what I'm saying. I think it needs to be better addressed and purpose for what we really want it to be, because our code, you said, we're between 2 kind of things again. And how long is that going to go on?
Well, I think so. So if the code is adopted, it's been a couple months now where it's been pending for the city commission. It would allow an increase of up to 4 feet in height for all understory homes. So that's the intention, is that it would allow for greater areas under the main home.
Right, but in this case specifically, in this home, which does not have a huge property, which doesn't have the luxury of being able to terrace fountains and have more activated spaces underneath, this is truly an elevated home. Thank goodness. Once again, happy that you're going way up above the floodplain, of course, but because of this narrow lot, because of this home, these homes, both of them specifically, this is really a parking court underneath the home. Whether you want to put furniture down here or not, this is not going to be a situation where this understory is somewhere like, okay, so maybe they'll put some workout equipment down there, maybe, and But again, like with all the other terraces and all the other beautiful spaces that are kind of accessible to the sun and whatnot, and views and whatever else, I don't know how much, and yes, you can't enclose, there's only so much enclosed space you can put down here, which they comply with that part of the code. But in this specific instance, I'm not really getting why we need all this, the extra height. I don't see it. I don't know why we can't go 10 feet floor to floor on the first floor. You have 2'6" for your structure and all your other stuff. I don't know. Can you shave some? I mean, you wouldn't be asking for any of this we wouldn't be analyzing this understory. For instance, if you didn't ask for this additional height, you'd be completely compliant. So, I think somewhere for me there needs to be a little bit. This is not like an understory where like you're going to be hanging out here. This is not one of the situations. We have other ones where we have there's chairs, and yes, I can see it, like the pool is down there and there's like some ponds and other stuff, but because you have this narrow lot, there's just nothing happening on any of the sides, right?
So good morning. So first of all, yeah, the idea is not to have usable space. However, we have the stairs and the elevator, and right now we have 8'3". We could shave it a little bit, to satisfy the board. I'm fine with it. The idea, again, is not to use a space under. In the design of the house, it was at least important to me not to see a garage from the street and to hide the garage. I personally don't think a garage is aesthetically pleasant from the street. And the idea of the design too was to push back the second floor from the street way beyond what the code even is asking for, and we did that. I think the code calls for 30 feet setback from the street for the 2-story, and then I don't know where we are right now. We're probably at 50 or 55 feet from the street. So, but this being said, listen, I agree with you that we don't need the space to use it under a side of the garage, the stairs and the elevator. So we can shave to satisfy you a few inches. But again, we're not asking extra height, for extra ceiling height inside the house. It's really for the understory.
It's you're absolutely right that your second floor is pushed way back, but the perception will be that your first floor is really a second floor as your understory grows, and then it's now it looks like a typical floor on a house.
You're right, but it is way lower than what a typical 2-story home will allow to build in the current code. But you're right, but it is still way lower than what it could be. So
It's 10'3" floor to floor right now.
It's what?
10'3" floor to floor. What would be normal, 12'3"?
I mean, if it's agreeable with you, we can shave off, a little bit of the height under the house, and it's just going to lower the ceiling from 8'3" to whatever, which is not very excessive.
And I think there was a lot discussed, in the last 5 minutes or so. Robert, do you have any comments to what you've heard?
Yes. So to begin with, we could theoretically take 1 foot out of the height waiver request to meet the 7'6" minimum ceiling height requirement in the understory. That would be keeping, we'd take it out of the height of the structure above, or 3 inches out of each of the floor plates. We can work with the MEP and structural to try to minimize those and still be able to do it. But we would need at least 1 foot to do the understory home. Again, this is because the base plate elevation at a lower height than is elsewhere, and the minimum paving elevation, which is higher than what the surrounding grade is. So we could make that work with a 12-inch height waiver, which I believe addresses some of the comments of the board.
Word.
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, I think it's, I would leave it up to you, the architect, to decide where to kind of take that height out, decide where the impact on your overall design, it's least impactful, I guess, right? And accomplishes the overall goal of bringing the massing height of the project down. I think that's the one thing that, at least for me, I'm focusing on. Some of the other design observations that Alex gave, I think are super viable, and we should probably, if we were to make a motion, I would say, I think kind of disconnecting that front section of the second home from the middle section is a great idea. That band, I think. But I definitely, because everything else is maxed out here, I need there to be just some give here. So I do appreciate the concession to find a way to at least reduce from 24 inches down to 12.
Is 12 enough, everyone? Yeah. Alex. What? Is 12 enough?
And just so you guys know, because this is not a variance, it's just design review approval. So a waiver just needs 4 votes versus the 5 votes.
And I just confirmed Alex's comment on the banding. We're okay with that.
I'll be okay with it to satisfy again,
I don't know about the way. I'll go with, the board, whatever, architects on that.
Help me understand, and we make sure we're on the same base. The band isn't shown on these drawings.
Right.
No, it's the one that Alex is referring to is
a different one.
Yeah.
No, it's
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right.
that one.
I feel like the way the wind is blowing maybe is that this is more something that needs to be, because I also would like to see with the height waiver, or with the height issue, and also the overall design, because I think that's sort of our point, that the overall design just seems too massive. I feel like this should be continued to, be looked at again, ways to not make these buildings seem so massive, to look at them together. I mean, even one of the things that I was noticing, again, thinking about the relationship between both houses, Alex made the point that in one of the properties, the guest house is in the center and the other one, it's to the side, maybe have them both be to the side, or, I think his point was to look at the east elevations of both at the same time and come up with some sort of relationship there, to create, I don't want to say cohesion, because I recognize they should be individual homes, but it's still, on that block.
Well, Sarah, the elephant in the room here is that we don't know who's going to live in these homes that are being developed. It's a developer project because they're identical and he's trying to market them together. We're not. And it's possible that someone will come back who wants to buy this and want changes made to it. Always. So that's sort of an undertone. If someone coming in here and they had their next were going to be their children and you were going to live in one and they wanted them identical, kind of shared things in common, it'd be a lot easier to accept certain things.
So are you saying we shouldn't fine tune the design, or?
Well, I think the height is the primary issue here. And if we just said no to 2 feet, that would be it.
I mean, again, I'm fine with, and I will find out, asking just 1 feet instead of 2, and we'll find out. We work with the architect and the team to make it work to satisfy the board, and we'll remove the concrete bands like on the second house, and that's okay, that's agreeable. So like this, we satisfy your comments.
I agree with you with the designer. You're saying, you don't want to see the cars, you don't want to see the garage. I think that's a good approach. But I also question though what that translates to. Again, I also don't want to have this long expanse of black tile wall running along the length of the property in an effort to, I guess that's why I'm saying I feel like the design needs to be a little bit refined. I don't know what the solution is, but I understand the concept and I think it's a good concept. But in my opinion, it just needs to be refined.
Robert wants to opinion.
I can try a motion, maybe. Okay, let's try one. So I'll start with just the first one, right? So I move to approve DRB file 22-0891, inclusive of a modification to the waiver from to a height of 25 feet. And inclusive of all staff's recommendations and having the applicant work with staff on further articulating the street front facade level to mitigate the massing of the front elevation.
You're in the north building.
The north building. Was that right? Yes. Number one.
We have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? Motion passes 6-0.
Okay, I'll try another one. I move to approve DRB application 22-0891, the south
0892.
0892. With the a waiver to allow a 25-foot height, and that the applicant will also remove the connecting band from the front structure to the middle structure and comply with all staff's recommendations.
Do you want to do the rounded corners for the understory?
Yeah, and I think that's a great idea too. Per Alex's comment, to further articulate roundness on the front massing of the home.
And we're fine with that condition as well, just for the record.
Did he also bring up the location? Wasn't that, Alex, wasn't that your point too, that the front, the guest house in the front, it's
I think
encroached
it would be
in the other-
better if it was continued the A, B.
I mean, the idea here was to make them look different too. One is not like necessarily like larger than the other. So I like to keep this that way, you know, I mean, we've worked on all of the other points. I appreciate it.
If it just suggest something, so it's not concrete, Michael, if we could put a condition that we explore.
If we want to make it so that it's up, if the applicant
Right.
wants to, we can, it's at staff level, look at the placement of that structure, either in the center or to the one side, working with what works best for the two properties together.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, yeah.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 6-0. Thank you.
And Robert, can you just make sure that the next time you have an application in front of us, it has day views as well as night renderings? I think that would be really helpful for everyone. Thank
Of
you.
course.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Okay, so motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Second.
You in favor?